Hello, this is Little Green Ghouls, and welcome back to Goosebumps Revisited, a series where I break down a classic Goosebumps book and any episode that goes along with it. I will also be telling some of our Goosebumps cliches and classic moments. This week, I'm excited to visit Go Eat Worms. This was a book I owned, but probably just read once because I'd say it's the worst book I've read so far during this Little Revisited series. Todd is a terrible protagonist, and I spent the book wanting bad things to happen to him, which thankfully some gross things do happen to Todd, but not enough to save the book. If you're gonna skip this book, you won't be missing much. Even Stein considers it one of his least favorites, so that says something. Despite being such a terrible book, I really like the cover. I'm pretty sure I even had one of the notebooks we see in the merchandise section later. The worms just look cool, and I'm glad Jacobus went for a cartoony worm versus the realistic ones. The imagery of worms busting through a notebook is ridiculous, but I love it. It's also heavy on the purples, which I'm always a fan of. The 2004 slime border just doesn't look great. Yellow and purple usually work together, but something about this cover just looks ugly to me, and I am not a fan. There's also no later 2000s reprint to look at this week, probably because this book sucked. I noticed when working on the international covers this weekend that Go Eat Worms frequently was omitted from some printings even, so it's pretty bad. This book had way more merchandise than I was expecting this week, and so much of it is paper-based for some reason. We have a couple of student planners, and I think the darker one is the superior version. We also have a Go Eat Worms notepad, a journal that came with a free Curse of the Mummy bookmark, and even some index tab dividers for your notebook. Go Eat Worms somehow managed to get itself a Halloween greeting card that says, hustling to finish his homework so he could go trick-or-treating, Todd took out his math notebook and found a mass of long purple worms crawling around between the pages. And you think your homework is chilling? Hope Halloween's filled with fun surprises for you. I also came across this Goosebumps worm house where you can make your own gummy worms to snack on, which is pretty awesome. Our front tag says, homework was never this gross before. And I wish this book had more moments like this cover depicts, but it just doesn't. Our back tag says, they're creepy and they're crawly, they're totally disgusting. But really, the most disgusting part of this story is Todd's shitty attitude throughout it. Okay, so now let's read this blurb on the back. Obsessed with worms? That's putting it mildly. Todd is so fascinated with worms, he keeps a worm farm in his basement. Most of all, Todd loves torturing his sister and her best friend with worms, dropping them in their hair, down their backs, until one day, after cutting a worm in half, Todd notices something strange. The rest of the worms seem to be staring at him. Suddenly, worms start showing up in the worst places. In his bed, in his homework, even in his spaghetti. What's a worm lover to do when his own worms are starting to gross him out? It's kind of funny, but worms never show up in Todd's spaghetti. But anyways, on to the summary. This book opens with, before the worms turned mean, which I have to say really made me question how on earth a worm can be mean, and left me wondering which direction this book could possibly go. We meet Todd Barstow, who's going to be our protagonist for this book, and he is worm obsessed. Todd has even built himself a worm farm in his basement for worm activities, where he studied them, he played with them, he did experiments with them. Sometimes he carried them around with him. Sometimes he scared people with them. The part about the experiments does not bode well for these worms, I worry. He also enjoys torturing his sister Regina with worms by invading her space with them constantly. This includes putting them down her shirt and in her hair. Todd would not survive long in my home. Todd's worm hobby has earned him a best friend though, Danny Fletcher, who really doesn't get the love for worms themselves, but he's down for the chaos of scaring people with them. We learn that Todd even looks like a worm according to his own mother, which is worse than the Stein bird children, I think. Todd doesn't think this is funny because he took worms seriously. People have all kinds of special interests, so you do you, Todd, but worms are a no for me. Danny and Todd are two peas in a pod given their reaction to worm pranks. Whenever Todd succeeded in making someone scream in surprise, Danny would toss back his head, let out a high-pitched cheer, and slap Todd hard on the back with his chubby freckled hand. Then the two of them would screech with laughter, roll around on the floor, and enjoy their victory. They had a great time with worms. Todd wants to be a scientist when he grows up, and given how the scientists in the Goosebumps universe act, his behavior is starting to make a little more sense. It's like an evil mad scientist origin story. Todd is absolutely shameless with his worm love, and even keeps a shovel and bucket in his locker so he can dig up the baseball field after rainy days at recess. I'm shocked that the school custodian allows this, because I can't see random holes in the baseball field going unnoticed. There's apparently a science fair going on, and Todd has built a worm house that he is certain is going to win, even though it just sounds like a house-shaped box full of dirt and worms. Another girl named Heather is very into snails, and she seems to be the biggest competition in Todd's mind. I thought this might be the start of a preteen romance, but Todd hates Heather, and thinks snails are for babies, no way they can compete with worms. The dialogue in this book is something else, like every page is read like this so far. It's for science, Todd said seriously. This one is as big as a snake. Did you ever think of collecting snakes? Danny asked. No, Todd replied quickly, digging deep into the mud. No way. Why not? Because I like worms, Todd said. This child just keeps saying he likes worms in short, choppy dialogue. As the two strange boys are engaging in more riveting banter, the ground suddenly starts to shake, and we end the chapter with them running and shouting earthquake. If this is a real earthquake, I think it's our first Goosebumps natural disaster. They race into the lunchroom, only to realize nobody else felt the earthquake, and then to add insult to injury, Todd was so freaked, he dropped all of his precious worms. We also learned that Todd lives in Ohio, because one of the kids is like, "We don't get earthquakes in Ohio, duh." While in the cafeteria, Todd mocks Regina and her best friend Beth's science fair project, which is a giant papier-mâché Robin that they have lovingly titled Christopher Robin, which I think is great. However, if it's not worms, Todd hates it by default. We have clearly established this. Regina and Beth are very close friends, because they are sharing chicken noodle soup. Soup is just not a shareable food in my mind. Todd takes this opportunity to insert more worm talk into the story. He bets that there's a worm in the soup, and then when Beth shows him that he's wrong, he throws a big fat purple worm into her chicken noodle soup. The girls are disgusted, and the two boys are delighted. I'd make Todd eat it if he ruined my soup. While they're enjoying the chaos they've caused, they look out the window and see commotion out by second base where they were digging. Regina tells Todd that Patrick, the snobby rich kid according to Todd, is also doing a worm experiment, so now he's out there messing around in Todd's worm digging spot. Todd does not stand for this, and races out of the lunchroom to confront Patrick. On his way out, he crashes into a teacher, and causes her to spill spaghetti all over herself. Todd doesn't care in the slightest, because in his mind, she stepped out in front of me. And he somehow gets to leave the situation without any real consequence. Todd sounds like a lovely kid. They confront Patrick, and as he's about to tell Todd what his worm project entails, we get a chapter ending that I think is supposed to be set up like a cliffhanger. "What's your project?" Todd repeated. Okay, Patrick said, wiping dirt off his hands. "I'll tell you. My project is..." Start chapter 5. The class bell rang. "Oh, we've got to go in," Danny urged, tugging at Todd's sleeve. "Wait," Todd said, his eyes on Patrick's. "Tell me now," he insisted. "But we'll be late," Danny insisted. "The suspense is just killing me." Patrick mocks Todd and says he's putting little cardboard wings on worms and teaching them to fly, and for a moment, I was very excited about this idea before it became apparent it was a joke. Todd and Danny are little bullies and circle up on Patrick demanding he tell them the project. As this is happening, the ground starts to shake again, and we end the chapter with the boys running for their lives. Stein decides we don't get to know what's happening with the shaking just yet though, so we cut to hours later with Todd and Regina in the garage. Regina's working on Christopher Robin, and Todd interrogates her about what Patrick's project could be. This goes on for pages, and it's as exciting as it sounds. Eventually, Todd settles on going to Patrick's house to learn more about the project, and once Regina gives Todd Patrick's address, he drops a worm down her shirt. Danny and Todd reach the address Regina gave, and it sounds like an abandoned old mansion, and not a house anybody currently lives in. But maybe we're just trying to add some creepiness to this dull-ass book? I don't know. No one is home, so Todd and Danny are peeking into the windows and looking for a way to break in, because that lines up with the morals we've established for these two little hooligans. While lurking around, they are suddenly attacked by a vicious dog in a chapter cliffhanger, because we need something to happen in the story. Luckily for the boys, the door is unlocked, and they're able just to hide inside the dark house. The house is clearly abandoned, there's no furniture, bare cupboards, and dust everywhere, but our two geniuses think that Patrick's family just must be weird, and they continue their search for the worm project. The book gets briefly interesting, where we think maybe the boys found a dead body. "Something's weird in here," Danny murmured. "Something is very weird." They both gasped as they stepped into the living room, and they saw a figure hunched in the window. They saw the decayed green flesh of his face. They saw the bones of his jaw, open in a hideous toothless grin. They saw his evil sunken eyes staring across the room at them. And that's the end of the chapter. But finding a dead body is too good to be true, and we learn from some very, very clunky dialogue that after Todd and Danny raced out of the house, he overheard Regina on the phone saying how she sent them to the wrong address, and that they were just scared by an old Halloween decoration. This of course causes Todd to vow a prank of his own, and it's safe to assume this will involve worms. We then jump to the science fair, and I'm using this term very loosely because I'm not sure how a giant papier-mâché Robin and a box of worms count as science projects, but in this universe they do. We finally get to see Patrick's project, and it's another non-science science project because Patrick has built a worm skyscraper. It's essentially the same thing as Todd's except bigger, just a box full of worms basically. Todd continues on his way to becoming our worst protagonist yet because we learn he sabotaged his sister's Christopher Robin just for shits and gigs. While the judges are admiring the enormous papier-mâché bird, they pull on a string that's connected to the beak and outpour 30 worms onto the judges. The audience is disgusted and Todd is thrilled. All of this has caused him to feel a little less bad about his own shitty project, and Patrick thinks Todd's prank is hilarious and tells him, "Cool move, Ace," as one does. The judges finally make their way over, but not before stopping by Patrick's worm skyscraper to ask these stupid-ass questions to make it seem somewhat science-like, I guess. They gazed at Patrick's skyscraper for at least 5 minutes. "How did you get all those worms in there?" the bald judge asked. "I love the elevator. How many worms are there in total? Can worms survive in a real skyscraper? And what does this project prove about gravity?" The judges have nothing to say about Todd's project, and we get a chapter cliffhanger where the winner's about to be announced, because Stein thinks we're really invested in this competition. It ends up being Danny's balloon solar system project, and I think this is supposed to be funny, because all we've heard for the past 2 chapters is how shitty this solar system project is, with deflated balloons taped to a blackboard. Regina confronts Todd, and he shows no remorse, because he's firmly established himself as our first sociopath protagonist. He throws another worm on his sister, and in response, she snaps and finally shoves Todd. I was kind of hoping for a Samantha Berg moment, and maybe she'd strangle Todd. This causes Todd to fall over into the table, sending the worm skyscraper crashing down onto the liquids and gases experiment. This results in a chapter cliffhanger explosion. Unfortunately, Todd makes it out unscathed, and in the end it just made a mess with blasting worms everywhere. We jump to a few days later, and Todd continues to be an unrelenting ass by tormenting Regina and Beth in the basement, while also gloating about destroying Christopher Robin. This time, he decides to gross them out by slicing a worm in half, just to show them how both halves can live. 2 girls point out that it looks like he upset the rest of his worms by doing that, and now the worms are angry at Todd. Stein doesn't really go into how the worms can look angry or act angry, aside from the fact that some of them are sticking part of their body out of the dirt. Nevertheless, Todd is now low-key worried that all the worms are against him. We spend pages and pages of having a typical morning of waking up and having breakfast. This book is full of long sections of boring dialogue and descriptions of random moments just for the sake of killing time, it feels like. I've complained about this before in other Goosebumps books, but Go Eat Worms is the worst by far when it comes to this. Anyways, Todd eventually goes looking for his hat, and when he puts it on, there's some worms in it and they plop down on his head because he somehow put it on without noticing. Scary stuff. He thinks Regina did it, but she insists that she didn't, even though I think she would have had every right to do it. Todd is just certain he's been horribly wronged, even though he sticks worms on people all the goddamn time, because he's a hypocritical little asshole. The chapter ends with him finding a worm in his cereal before going off to school. Too bad he didn't eat it, but I only had to wait a chapter though, because later at lunch he takes a big old bite out of his peanut butter and jelly sandwich, thinks it tastes funny, and discovers a big fat purple worm in it. He goes to find Regina, and we waste 4 pages of him wandering around asking people where his sister is. When he finds her, he's with Beth and Patrick, and he overhears Patrick say, "No, Todd doesn't know. He doesn't know I'm doing it." And Todd of course thinks this has to do with the recent worm events. Thankfully, we don't have to spend any time on this, because it's quickly revealed that Patrick was referring to a comic that he drew titled The Adventures of Todd the Worm, accompanied by a drawing of a worm dressed as Todd. It sounds like art, to be honest. He confronts the group about the worms in his lunch, and they all seem genuinely confused, so this stumps Todd. Although, it's not exactly hard to confuse this boy. We jump to the next day, and Danny and Todd are back to their favorite worm digging spot, because Todd needs to replace the worms that keep escaping and appearing in places like his backpack and math notebook. The ground starts to rumble again, but the kids ignore it this time and keep on digging. Danny points out that it could be a sinkhole, which would be awesome, but it's not. At lunch, he's relieved to find that his sandwich is worm-free. We are then treated to pages of Todd enjoying a fun-filled Friday night where around every corner he expects to find a worm, but there isn't one. Until he finally decides to go to bed and discovers his bed is covered in them, but not before he puts his face right down on top of one because it was hiding on his pillow in plain sight. Todd shrieks loud enough for his mom to investigate, and he starts launching into how Regina needs to be stopped, but his mom lets him know that Regina is at a sleepover and couldn't have possibly put the worms in Todd's bed. The mystery continues. While he's downstairs putting the surviving worms back in their case, he decides now is the time to apologize to the worms, and he begs them to forgive him for slicing their friend in half. Once upstairs, he decides to take a hot bath, and once in the tub, and nice and relaxed, worms start to plop into the tub from the faucet. Splash. Another worm dropped from the faucet. Then 2 more. They hit the surface of the water and plumped to the bottom of the tub, just past Todd's feet. Hey, he pulled his feet away and drew himself up in a sitting position. What's going on? As Todd stared in horror, brown and purple worms tumbled from the faucet, 3 and 4 at a time, splashing into the tub. He raised his eyes to more worms, sliding down the tile walls, plopping on into the water, onto his legs, onto his shoulders. No! He struggled to climb out, trying to push himself to his feet with both hands, but the tub bottom was covered with wriggling, swimming, slithering worms, and his hands kept slipping out from under him. Help! Breathing hard, he managed to climb his knees. Worms clung to his back and shoulders. He could feel them crawling all over his hot, wet skin. More worms tumbled down the walls. They seemed to be raining from the ceiling. More and more poured out of the faucet. They turned the entire tub into a seething, wriggling sea of brown and purple. Help, somebody, Todd shouted. But the worms were pulling him now, pulling him down. He could feel their wet grasps, tiny 100 little prickles, as they held him tightly and tugged him down into the churning water. They plopped onto his head, crawled over his face, dangled over his quivering shoulders, covered him, and continued to rain down, to pour down, to pull him down into them, wriggling dark sea of worms. Wet worms. As per usual, this is all a little too exciting to be true, and he wakes up from his dream. I'll forgive this dream because it's not like anything else is happening in the story, Todd ends this sequence with a sudden plan to figure out how the worms are escaping and tormenting him, but we aren't privy to this knowledge yet. The next day, Todd and Danny go to see a movie about space aliens trying to run a car wash, and that honestly sounds more interesting than this book. Finally, the following day, we get to see Todd's grand plan that he's been building up for over a chapter of nothingness. Are you ready for it? He's gonna sit all night and watch the tank. That's it. Why this has to be a Sunday night and not the prior 2 nights, I don't really understand. But yeah, that's the master plan that was 2 chapters in the making. As he's watching the worms, he hears footsteps coming down the stairs, and just when he thinks he's gonna see who's behind all this, it ends up being his dad, who thought Todd was a burglar. The dad has had enough of this shit and declares that the worm tank is out tomorrow, and they're dumping all the worms in the garden in the morning. Todd is of course disappointed and sad that all that planning was for nothing. Yes, all that grand planning about sitting and staring at a worm tank all night. The next day at school, for like the 3rd time in this story, Todd overhears a conversation about himself. This time it's Regina confessing to being the one who put the worms in his stuff this whole time. Well, that's convenient, and ignores when she supposedly was at a slumber party. This causes Todd to vow revenge again with more worms. They return to the worm digging spot, and as they're digging, the ground shakes again. The boys ignore it this time because it's turned out to be nothing the past 3 times. However, this time something actually happens. A big ass worm as thick as a tree trunk pops out of the ground and wraps itself around Todd. Todd thinks the mother worm is coming to protect her babies, and is then dragged into the worm's hole. We shift to Danny's perspective as he tries to pull Todd out by his feet, but it's no use because this worm is strong. Suddenly, Christopher Robin appears on the scene and scares the worm away. Because yes, Regina and Beth just so happened to be passing by with their gigantic papier-mâché bird, and it scared the worm off. No one believes the boy's story, of course, and we cut to weeks later. Due to his trauma, Todd now has moved on to collecting butterflies since they are soft and gentle. He chloroforms a butterfly and stabs it with a pin to add to his collection. At this point, he's going to be moving on to small mammals next, like the little psycho he is. But in true Goosebumps fashion, on the last page he wakes up in the night to find a butterfly the size of a bedsheet holding an enormous silver pin, presumably ready to impale Todd like he did to the previous butterfly, and that's how this one ends. I honestly don't mind that this book ends with Todd getting skewered, but it doesn't make it any less stupid though. Thankfully, there's a direct episode pairing to Go Eat Worms, and it's actually a pretty big improvement on the book. We have 2 notable actors this week. Kristen Farley, who played Regina. She's gone on to do a ton of voice acting, which I always think is cool, and was in the Virgin Suicides like every other Canadian actress. Our other notable actor is Noah James, who goes by 14 now, who played Todd. He's gone on to also be in the Virgin Suicides, but more notably is a composer who worked quite a bit with Drake apparently. Okay, let's get into the episode. They're gonna have a hard time showing me a grosser worm moment than the worms in the bed from Stay Out of the Basement. Well, I spoke too soon.
Creatures. They aerate the soil, recycle waste, and they gross out girls when you draw.
This child is a sociopath.
We're gonna prove that worms can survive just about anything. Heat, cold, stretching, even cutting them in half.
I am not here for this X-Files slander.
We're gonna beat our project. You can forget it.
What are you gonna do? Use dolls to act out a story from the X-Files?
It's nice to see that they're not shying away from what an asshole this child is.
Worms!
Must have been something it ate.
You wrecked it! Ew! You're as slimy as those worms you tortured!
I don't know what these worms think they're doing. They don't have eyes. I repeat, he is a sociopath.
I've got figured out for the worms. It's like a racetrack, only the different tracks have different surfaces. You know, sandpaper, rocks, sticky stuff.
This looks familiar. Carly Beth had it worse.
What's wrong, Carly Beth? Oh, it's a worm!
At least we see some worms and the spaghetti, unlike in the book, despite what the blurb on the back said. This child has a problem.
No wonder I don't get in here more often.
It's not good when your own mother calls you worm boy.
The prosecution rests. Now hit the sack, worm boy. It's after 10.
This really is gross. I would need a sheet change and a shower before just hopping back to sleep. A fashionista is spotted.
Maybe your dad could have a look at it. I can bring it over later.
Lots of shots of pulsating dirt going on here. I already like the direction we're going with this episode.
Nice, juicy ones.
A worm's evil lair. Oh no, the worms can write.
Todd, we will make you squirm.
They really went all out on the worm budget.
Help! Someone!
So that's what worms sound like. The book definitely should have been more of this. This house is clean.
This house is now officially worm-free.
Uh-oh, he's moving on to bigger prey.
Don't worry, it's a stupid little minnow. They don't feel a thing.
How long can fish live in hot water or cold water? How long can a freshwater fish survive in salt water? Stuff like that.
A fish hook to the mouth is a pretty fitting end, I suppose. Overall, I thought Go Eat Worms really just sucked. It suffered from a very unlikable protagonist, a non-existent plot, a real lack of scares, but what really stood out to me was how choppy and clunky the dialogue in this book was for some reason. Like, I'm not looking for amazing prose and goosebumps, but something was up with this book. There were just so many long, boring scenes where literally nothing happened, and they just felt inserted to pad the book. I'm gonna go ahead and give this one our very first 1 out of 5 Robins. It kinda sucked on each level, and just straight up wasn't fun. Okay, on to our totals. Go Eat Worms did one thing right, and that was it added to our totals. In getting jiggy with the 90s, we were treated to 2 90s moments. These included Nintendo, and wearing a t-shirt that reached down to the knees, which was the fashion at the time. This raises our Goosebumps series total to 85 jiggy 90s moments. In Go Eat Worms, we had near constant pranks, resulting in a total of 8 pranks throughout the book. These pranks were all really just kind of sticking worms in places where they didn't belong, and both Regina and Todd were guilty of pulling them. This brings our series total to 42 It's a Prank Bros. Go Eat Worms contained one It's Only a Dream fake out. This was when Todd had a nightmare about taking a bath in a tub of worms. It was probably the highlight of the book. This raises our series total to 10. As far as asshole victims go, I'd say Todd getting speared by a giant butterfly definitely counts. He was an asshole this entire book, and he finally met his match. This raises our total to 16 asshole victims. Go Eat Worms had a total of 7 chapter cliffhangers, and they were really, really weak this book. There were quite a few where it was apparent I was supposed to think it was a cliffhanger, but it was so dull that I don't think it should count. This raises our Goosebumps total to 250. The clunky cliffhanger word for this book doesn't exist, because some of them were so bad, I don't know if they counted as cliffhangers, despite being presented as one. Like, we got a chapter break to reveal who won the science fair, or when there's a chapter break for Todd to check his sandwich for worms, and find none. Shocker ending. Our big twist to this story was when Todd woke up to find a butterfly the size of a bedsheet in his room, getting ready to stab him with a pin. Was this complete nonsense? Absolutely. This brings our series total to 16. Well, that's it for Go Eat Worms. This book sucked, and I don't really have much more to say about it. I won't be posting any Goosebumps Revisited videos the next 2 weeks since I'll be out of town, but I did put together some fun short videos this weekend to put out in the meantime. Let me know in the comments what you thought of Go Eat Worms. Do you find worms scary? How about giant papier-mâché birds? Do you think Todd grew up to be a serial killer? And also, what did you think of my worm horror clips this week? Anyways, as always, thanks again for watching, and make sure you subscribe for
the pride, the love,